So welcome to another virtual series of It's All About Shipping. It's an extra show for this week because we've got another interesting panel for you also on Friday. But today we're doing, I think, one of the subjects that are very close to my heart, and I've always been arguing since I joined the shipping industry, on how we should be trying to improve the image and raise awareness in that way of what the role of this industry does and how it should be going forward in this respect. In respect to PR, media communications, marketing, branding, and all the rest. And today I have brought together a panel of experts from a few places around the world to give us our input in this respect, especially under a crisis such as COVID, which has brought some issues to the surface, which we'll discuss today. So welcome to the panel, ladies. It's a pleasure to have you. To introduce my panel, I will start from the top. So from Greece, based in Athens, Athanasia Panagiotopoulou is the Chief Marketing Officer of a tech startup in shipping called VesselBot. Farzana Baduel is the CEO of Curzon PR, and she's also the resident PR expert at Oxford Foundry. Miss Sue Terpilowski, I cannot pronounce your surname, Sue. I'm so sorry. I've practiced, but so Sue is the chair of WISTA UK and Maritime UK Women in Maritime, and she's also the Image Line founder and director. Natasha Brown, also based in the UK, is Media and Communications Officer at the International Maritime Communication. And Laura is joining us from New York in the United States, who is a speaker, strategic communication consultant, and the founder of LHK Communications. It's a pleasure to have you with us today, ladies. Obviously, you've each got very diverse backgrounds, and I hope we're going to have a very interesting discussion today. And to go straight into it, COVID-19, a crisis worldwide, a pandemic, a lot of changes. I would like a few words from each on what the impact has been from your role and environment and what you have been dealing with. If we can start from Athanasia and make the rounds, it would be great.
Hello. First of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to participating to this panel with these distinguished ladies. Let me introduce a bit myself. My background is marketing. I'm a co-founder and CMO of a technology company, a startup company called VesselBot. We are dealing with the shipping industry, and we are developing constantly digital solutions for the maritime market. As far as your question concerns, of course, this COVID-19 pandemic crisis has caused great change to every human being in this world. Of course, we have been affected as individuals and as professionals. Our everyday life has changed dramatically. And of course, the shipping industry has been affected a lot. And as far as the marketing aspect concerns, the impact of this crisis was huge. And the most important issue that our colleagues has to deal with around the world is how to change strategies and how to adapt all the plans, the media plans, the marketing plans, and the strategy plans of their own companies and products and services within a night. And this is very interesting because we did manage to handle this situation, and I think, in my opinion, in most of the cases, with a great success.
Thank you, Athanasia. Farzana, going on to you.
Well, what I noticed is initially when the pandemic took hold, people were in survival mode. And so the main focus was, first of all, on internal communications. And so it was how to communicate to employees working from home, how to enable them to work effectively. And also there was a great concern from HR departments in terms of mental health. So there was a huge focus, a huge shift on internal communications, and a lot of the corporates that I work with, they stepped up their game in terms of resources to ensure that the messaging with internal communications was being increased more frequently, and a lot more messages coming from senior leadership, from the CEO and so forth. So I've seen quite a transformation in internal comms, a lot of use of video, perhaps because people may not be physically together, but video obviously brings people more together, and you feel more connected to your colleagues. I also, obviously there was a big focus upon liquidity issues, and so that had the unfortunate impact upon cost cutting, which also led to job losses. And so there was a big focus in communicating the job losses in a way that was very transparent, process orientated, and also that also had a lot of empathy. In terms of communications with stakeholders such as consumers, I think a lot of the research showed that the consumers were looking for brands that had purpose and that weren't just business as usual, but were looking at how they can kind of segue their normal goods and services into doing something for communities, to help their employees, to help the wider community. And you had, for instance, brands who were, traditionally working in retail, were actually, using their factories to create sort of PPE for, NHS staff and so forth. So you saw a lot more companies and brands stepping up, being more purposeful, and not being seen as being opportunistic, but looking at an opportunity to give back in community.
Excellent. Sue, from your perspective?
I think there's really sort of three sides that we've seen. One, as a company, we had to adapt to working from home, which we hadn't done, which for a communication company obviously is a little bit harder than normal, but we adapted very quickly and we got up and running probably quicker than I would have imagined. I'm really pleased that our staff really took up to the challenge. From a client's perspective, I agree. One of the biggest lessons they had to learn was internal communications. And most of our clients probably were not very good at that before, and possibly didn't even need to, because most of them were office bound and had an internal communication system, if you like. With remote working and people, some of them working 200 miles away, it did mean they had to learn very quickly about internal communications. And I see that as a positive, because that's something I've been saying we should be doing in the maritime sector for a long time. The other side of it is that most of our clients also had to start to learn how to communicate, not in marketing speak, but in business speak, because most of them, I would say, was not crisis communications. It was sensible business decisions that were being made and had to be communicated to customers and prospects about what they were doing within their business. So this was really a different form of communication, one that we used sort of some of our crisis PR skills, but we also adapted that into business language and how they could communicate to the customers what they were doing. And then likewise, as we said earlier, some of our customers suddenly had to lay off some people or make them redundant. And that then got into more of a communications of crisis sort of PR, how you handle the situation. But I think by and large, the biggest thing we've learned is that clients learned how to be honest with people and actually speak in an honest, fair way. And I think that was really important.
Excellent. And Natasha, obviously you come from an association background, so maybe your input might be a bit different from the ladies.
Yeah, hi everybody. Thank you for having me. So my original background is as a journalist, and then I joined the International Maritime Organization, which is part of the United Nations system, as communications and media officer. So our role is to try and get out the stories, the narrative about what the UN is doing in general, but specifically what the IMO is doing in terms of the maritime sector. So like everyone else, I mean, back in January, we were creating an information portal on the COVID situation with information coming out from the World Health Organization and China. And then suddenly we flash forward to the middle of March and we're all involved. So it's quite a unique crisis, whereas usually a crisis, you're not directly involved, but I think all of us have been impacted in some way and on our own family or personal situation. So it's not just something that is happening somewhere else, but actually absolutely everyone is involved with it. So we're dealing with our own personal issues of suddenly having to work remotely, but also trying to cover the crisis as it happens and get the right information to the right people. So I think that was perhaps a challenge initially in the middle of March when we suddenly went into lockdown, but now we've adapted to a new way of working, working remotely, video conferences, virtual Teams meetings, and so on. So I think we all have adapted. There's a whole skew of information coming out from various different sources, and we need to make sure, you know, that we provide the right factual information that our stakeholders need, whether that's the member states who want to know what other member states are doing, or, you know, the seafarer who is emailing us and saying about their specific personal problem, making sure that that gets to the right people within our team. So there's lots of different aspects, and I think we've all settled into a new way of working.
That's for sure. And Laura, you're in the States, in New York. You also work with different companies. So from your environment, which is a little bit more chaotic than the UK at the moment, I would say.
Yeah, it has been. Hello from the city so nice they named it twice, New York, New York. And you may wonder why I have a picture of you know, space instead of New York, but today is the NASA launch, the SpaceX launch, and I just thought it was a very hopeful event that where science and technology and innovation, I hope, can lead us out of this situation with the pandemic, the global pandemic, and hopefully there'll be some beautiful photographs from it of our wonderful oceans around the world. Thank you. It's great to hear everybody's perspective. As a strategic communicator, I think what's really interesting about the pandemic is that it involves the three aspects of crises: the immediate crises, as you know, people are affected on a daily basis, and the immediate response to that with, you know, the quarantines and lockdowns and the immediate impact to the economy and businesses of every size across every industry, including maritime, but also the emerging situation where the mitigation companies are trying to mitigate the impact of this crisis. And then there's the sustained aspect of it, where there's a continual rollout of consequences. So it's really challenging for corporate leaders to keep all of these three legs of the stool in perspective, in addition to all of the other things that are going on with digital transformation and how every company is facing digital transformation. And I think later we may talk a little bit about that and what's going on in terms of cybersecurity and data privacy. It's a very challenging time for enterprises today around the world facing digital transformation. And I think
Great, sorry, that was a few technical issues. So we've seen quite a few issues from each of your backgrounds, which is very interesting. And I guess the next question that leads from what you have all talked about, the challenges of management, internal communications, and generally this being a challenge as such. Each from your each perspective, or your own perspective of media communications, corporate imaging, and the rest, what would you say are the importance of these aspects in business operations? How do they facilitate them, especially in a crisis like this? And should they be, should crisis strategies be mandatory from now on? Or should they have already been in place? What is your perspective in this respect? Shall we start from Athanasia again and make the rounds?
Of course, everybody knows that a crisis is a difficult situation that we have to face, either as companies, as entities, either as communities or as individuals. Of course, as a professional of marketing professional, I've learned during my experience that you have to have always in place a plan B and be prepared to face a crisis within your plans, role, and anything that you are planning to implement with regards to the strategy of your brand. And this is the reason why, as you may all know, big organizations, big entities have always a crisis management plan always ready in order to activate it when needed. This is not something that you can imagine that will happen, but in any case, everyone should be prepared to face any uncomfort and any weird situation that may come in our professional life, and not only. And yes, this is the reason that I believe that every organization, every entity from now on has to be prepared, because it is a two-faced role to handle a situation like this pandemic. You have to protect your employees, and we are referring to a pandemic that affects our health. So you have to be ready and have a plan ready to protect the health of your employees. And of course, on the other side, you have to be ready to prepare and be prepared to handle this weird situation with regards to your brand ID and brand image, and to quickly find ways to adapt your communication and everything that has to deal with your company or your brand as such.
Excellent. And Farzana?
Well, I find in our experience, a lot of the organizations that we work with have business continuity plans already, but perhaps they've neglected the crisis comm side, in the sense that they'd have like a report commissioned by crisis people and it would be buried somewhere, and nobody's probably read it, or they have low recall of it. And perhaps with people moving around in C-suite positions, it would be very much sort of a sideline issue. So what we have found is actually, going in when this happened, they were quite rusty. And so, so what we've tried to have a conversation with them about now is, this is obviously a crisis issue. It looks likely that we will be living in a world where this perhaps will not be a one-off, and history has shown that these pandemics continue with increased globalization and interconnected global hubs, and increased international travel. It looks like obviously the risks are going to be higher and higher, and obviously with theories such as the Black Swan theory, it shows in this global interconnected world, especially when the communications landscape is so integrated, it looks like there'll be more and more crises on the horizon. And so what we try and counsel our clients is we should actually do a risk analysis on a regular basis, and then we identify key issues and we manage those issues, and we manage contingency plans around it. So for instance, what we found is it wasn't business as usual in terms of communications during the pandemic. So what we had to do is we didn't quite understand the sentiment of various stakeholders, from employees to consumers. So we had to increase the spend in terms of measurement, and getting feedback in terms of the messages that we were putting out. Was it the right sentiment? Because it's so easy to sort of get on the wrong side of the public sentiment in areas that is a sort of an unknown environment. And so it's about, I think, creating an element of agility, so that in these times there is extra budget used for working in a more agile way, communication, so you get a lot more feedback coming in, so that you can hone your message and push it out in these extreme situations.
Great. And Sue?
Yeah, I think what we found with our clients is that it's been twofold. Some of them did have some crisis PR plans, but they didn't actually allow for something like this. It was more if a fire was on a ship or something was happening. So they had to adapt a crisis plan because they hadn't really actually factored in these sort of things. So we had to work with them. Also, because most of our clients are in the shipping industry, They've also found they've had to be a voice for the industry. So what's happened with the seafarers, the fact they've not been able to get off the ships and what people and countries have done to them, they've had to become a spokesperson for the whole of the industry, not just for themselves or their companies. So that's been a different type of learning curve as well. And we've done a lot of public speaking training with them, and also how they can be front people in TVs. And also that our clients have found they've had to be a conduit of information to their customers. So we've worked quite a lot of looking at what the IMO is putting out, what BIMCO is putting out, some other trade associations. So they can make sure that their customers got the information they needed when they needed to have it. So they also became almost like a news function and a conduit of information out to people as well. So they've had to adapt to lots of different ways of actually handling a communication strategy they haven't had before, alongside also adapting themselves, because most of our customers, it's the two big exhibitions of this year, SMM and Posidonia, and that's where they'd actually allowed to do most of their marketing. And with those both being cancelled, or probably being cancelled, I know Posidonia possibly might still go ahead, but we've had to sort of plan that it has been cancelled. They've had to rethink their whole strategies as well as their marketing and how they get their messages out and how they meet up with people. So it's been a lot of very steep learning curve. Everybody's adapted very quickly, and also it's also been a way of making them rethink how they communicate with their customers.
Perfect. Natasha?
So I suppose for us, we're perhaps in a privileged position. I work in a great team where we have 6, 7 people who are all great communicators, and we've all gone through various, obviously much smaller scale, crises or big accidents involving shipping before. So we know what the routine is. We've known how to do it, but we have had to get together, think of new ways that we can present information. For example, trying to go more into the human stories. We've always worked where we've had individual cases, for examples of seafarers who've been abandoned. We have our lawyers who work on those cases, but we've actually spoken to them and said, well, we need to get some of these stories out into the public sphere. So we now have a page where we've illustrated some of the specific examples of seafarers that we've helped who've been impacted because of the the COVID crisis, a particular story of a seafarer who'd had a heart attack, so not to do with COVID, but wasn't unable to go off the ship because of the COVID situation. So this involved various people in our different teams communicating with different national authorities and eventually getting the seafarer off the ship for medical attention. And this is slightly different from our usual work in saying the IMO's done this, adopted that, and developed that rule. So there was an opportunity as well for us to get involved with the more human side of the stories, and that's obviously continuing. So we're continuing to adapt to what is the information that we need to get out there. How can we make sure that information is relayed? What is the story here? What's the human story? And get that information out.
Perfect. And Laura?
Yeah, well, I would like to just affirm and reiterate the notion of enterprise risk management and the notion of companies being prepared with a plan, even though it may not include every aspect, but to have the blueprint is key so that you can move quickly, because the news cycle is so immediate today, and media interest is reflected by the scope and scale of an incident. But I think that in terms of the brand integrity and the enterprise in the marketplace, you really want to make sure that somebody's able to respond in a news cycle in a way that makes it sure that it's communicated, that the C-suite knows what's going on and is aware, and they're not caught off guard. I think that's really important today. And also, it's important to know what can be said based on the incident, because there are a lot of things that are emerging now having to do with COVID-19. The framework is uncertainty. So litigation support is a key component of crisis communications. So if there's going to be litigation related to COVID-19, then maybe you can't say very much until after that case is settled. But what can you say to whom? Who are the stakeholders? And knowing that type of information is really key in terms of litigation, because all it takes is one mindless employee picking up the phone and saying something out of turn, and it can really create a lot of damage for an enterprise. So that whole piece of litigation support is a really important aspect. And today there's the complexity of what's going on in digital transformation, the regulatory environment, litigation, and just employee relations and internal communications is so complex. Not everybody can or wants to do everything, but being able to identify what's essential is, to me, what the exercise is about, and where the strategy needs to be in place. And with that.
True, very true story. And I kind of smiled because a few examples of what an employee can just open his mouth and say during a crisis while you're in the process of litigation. You can hear interesting stuff. My next question would be going beyond the companies and communications and associations like the IMO. Obviously, through this crisis, we have also seen the different approaches by government leaders, which might be interesting to slightly touch upon and see what they have been doing right, what they have been doing wrong, what could have been improved. For example, there's a great debate on, not saying that we're an all-female panel here, but that female leaders have been doing better communication-wise in managing this crisis. So what are your thoughts on that? Athanasia, do you want to do the honors again and start?
Okay, to be honest, I don't think that it is a matter of being female or male, but actually to be a capable leader and be able to take very important decisions in such a short period of time, because when this pandemic appears, nobody has the plenty of time to exercise and have this time frame to decide whether to do something or not doing this. So I don't think that it's a difficult situation and you don't know how to react. But in this case, you should take into consideration the advice of the experts. And in this situation where the doctors and all these experts that were well aware of this situation, and based on their advice, take the proper decision. Everyone knows that history will decide if they took the right or wrong decision and if they have acted in the ideal way. But yes, we are all women here, but we know that we are capable of handling more things at the same time. And yes, if we are having this in mind, yes, maybe in some cases the examples that you are referring at were true.
Have been a little bit more effective. Farzana, obviously, this is probably very close to your expertise.
Yeah, I mean, I have been obsessed with how the media have been talking about female political leaders and you know, putting political leaders in sort of gender camps and showing the different statistics in terms of, you know, getting infection rates under control. And of course, I find it absolutely fascinating because I've worked for a number of different politicians. I'd say the standout person here is probably the leader of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, and I think for three main reasons. She's harnessed three areas: tech, informality and empathy. So if you look at the tech side, she has taken to platforms like Facebook Live. If you look at the informality side, she has, really talked as if she's doing a FaceTime call with you and you're a buddy of hers, and she has just put her kids down and she's, and she just sat on the sofa and she's telling you what's going to happen, in terms of, the country, and it's a very informal way rather than sort of more formulaic press conferences, which she has also done. And then I think that the third most effective has really been empathy. She really does know how to communicate with empathy. And I was so fascinated by her communication ability that I did a bit of research, and I found out, of course, she studied public relations at university. And so, she is our sort of, modern day patron saint of the PR community at the moment. And I think also, we are living in an age where communication is key as the world becomes more complex. Obviously, with the advent of AI, robotics, automation, pandemics, globalization, and so forth, I think communication is more sought after, and empathy, which does lend itself to perhaps the feminine side of the gender spectrum, is becoming an increased sort of valued leadership ability. So yeah, I'm pretty pleased about how they are judging historically feminine qualities such as empathy.
Excellent. And Sue, again, a topic close to your heart, the female leadership. And
yeah, I mean, I agree. It's those leaders that show empathy are the ones that are coming out best, whether it's male or female. Tends to be more female are better at showing that. I think also there's an element of the local media. So country medias are different. All of them really now have a low news threshold at the moment of stories, so they can get really grasping on one story and going for it. So we've just had a frenzy in the UK at the moment, where the media are actually making the news rather than reporting the news, and how you deal with those situations is mixed. It's been done probably not the way I would advise at the moment, but then I'm not the political advisor at the moment to the government. But I think going back to your point is it's about the female qualities. It doesn't have to necessarily be a female person, which is the empathy, understanding your public and talking to them and not at them, and also talking with trust and honesty of what you're saying. And those are all qualities that need to come over in this situation. Because the one thing everybody has to do is get their country on side to behave in a completely different way than they've had to do before. We are by nature a herd animal. We don't respond very well to being in silos or very small communities of 1 or 2 units, and that goes against our natural being. So to actually get people to change in such a dramatic way as we've had means that the leader has to get the trust of their country very, very quickly. And the leaders that have succeeded in that are the ones where the countries have got the control fairly easily under control in time spans. And I think that is sort of some of the things we're going to learn as we go out of this and we start to all analyse the video footage, as we all will. It's those sorts of messages, the quick messages of getting things under control very quickly and asking people to change behaviour is going to be where there have been the successes. Where it's then gone into the more wishy story about trying to get out of this pandemic, I think is going to really show the leadership, because we've got probably a year or so. These communications have got to happen, and how they're going to manage those, where it's going to be a lot more up and down messaging, is going to be very interesting.
excellent. And Natasha?
Yeah, I agree with what has been said already. I think that's been said very well. I think an interesting point is to look at, are these female leaderships actually in societies and countries which are actually more diverse anyway, more equitable across the board? So it's not that they themselves are a female leader leading the way, but the societies, the governments, the countries that they are in already have a much more diverse and have many more opportunities for female and male, and therefore the society itself is a better, if you like, society anyway, and a more diverse society. So they are in a position where they're not battling an age-old patriarchal type society, but they have much more freedom because that society that they're in. So I think that probably helps to analyze what is the country like where the female leaders are that are doing, perhaps you might say, a better job.
A very valid point, and I'm glad you brought it up, actually. And Laura, your thoughts on this?
Well, I would respectfully disagree with the notion of empathy being a feminine or a gender-based quality. I just would say for anyone working in healthcare today, there's a lot of empathy for the, COVID patients. And I know we're talking about political leaders. Considering there's never been a woman president of the United States, it's a little bit of a narrow space to opine on this. But I would say that there are, to me, it's the ability to harness and persuade the call to action. And I think that there are leaders who are able to do that better than others. And I think that has to do with communications and trust. And I agree with everybody who pointed that out already. I think that the call to action is key, and having the people understand and trust that message. And when there's a mixed message, that call to action can be lost. So I think any leader who's willing to take a stand and encourage best practices, especially around COVID-19, is anybody who has my vote. So, I wish I could say that, there was a woman president who was the best at everything, but hopefully one day we'll get to that. But, I think right now the leader who we need, leadership who can create the call to action that people will respond to. And whatever that takes, whether it's empathy or whether it's commanding voice, I think that's
perfect. True. Very valid points there also. Thank you, Laura, for your input. I think now moving more into the shipping side of things, and actually I'm going to bring two examples which I would like our non-shipping panelists. Well, Farzana is not part of the industry, and Laura also does a wider spectrum also. So the rest of the ladies are more familiar with these cases probably, but surely follow the media, you're aware. One of them obviously was a Diamond Princess cruise ship. So suddenly all over the media, what we have known as a luxury holiday vacation and what a lot of people dream of became this terror place that was contaminated and couldn't call any port. And it was a health threat to societies and health, etc. And it took great dimensions in the media, and everything that was out there was negative, obviously. So I would like input in this respect on the accuracy of putting key messages out there and having a correct image, how that helps in times of crisis. And the other very fascinating thing is that while automatically, obviously, doctors, nurses, store workers, transport workers at land were considered key workers, there was we had to run a huge campaign in the maritime industry to also acknowledge seafarers as key workers, when in essence, without these people at sea, you can't get the medicines to the doctors and you can't get the food on the shelves. So that's why I said this is an aspect close to an issue close to my heart, this branding this industry better. But it is a very traditional industry, and you do see reluctances on what the cons might be and what the pros. So maybe Farzana and Laura can go first, being non-maritime orientated, and then the rest of the ladies that are more familiar can express their views also. Who wants to go first?
You want to go first?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Yeah, so I think it's incredibly tough for the industry because, of course, it's it's very dramatic, the story of these these sort of cruises out in the middle of the sea, and it just grips human imagination, and the unfortunate side effect is, people will be reluctant to then go on and book, the sort of the cruise, and the economic impact is devastating. And so perhaps, what could help is, for instance, a lot of people are fearful also of going to restaurants or going to, going on an aeroplane and so forth, as and when the lockdown measures are released. And what those industries I've noticed have been doing is that they've started some sort of debate where various different people in the industry have talked about what are the sort of measures that are specific to the industry that they will take to safeguard the consumers. So, you've for instance talked about, I don't know, some airline boss was saying, well, maybe we won't use the middle seat, but we'll use the seats on either side. And another person said, oh no, that's rubbish, that doesn't work. But there's been some sort of debate, whereas I haven't really heard that same debate coming in from the maritime industry in terms of the cruises, but I have heard from airlines, airports, restaurants, and other sectors. I think, so I think there has to be that sort of open debate. And I think it is also tough for the industry because it's just not front of mind. Like as if, going to restaurants, going to, airports and airplanes are. So I think perhaps a bit of industry debate elevated to the media to discuss measures that they can take to mitigate any sort of risks, because I think it is, I remember I was flicking through a magazine, I think The Economist, and I saw an advert for a cruise, and this was I think last week's, and I thought, my God, why would they even advertise? Nobody will book. And so and that was just my sort of, I'm an industry outside, and that was just my initial response of horror, like, why would you waste this advertising budget and spend it now? So it's, I think definitely there is obviously a public sentiment of fear, and I think moving that with a bit of debate and then just gradually shifting that public sentiment so that they understand what the risks are, they don't have a knee-jerk reaction to it, they hear different sides of the debate, and then basically hand-holding them to the position where they will be able to go to the top of the sales funnel and start moving back down to becoming customers again. It's tough though.
Definitely. And Laura?
Well, I would say that the maritime industry has such an extraordinarily rich history. And this situation is not the first time that there's been a global pandemic. There was a 1918 pandemic. I would encourage the industry to take a look back and look at the incidents that the industry as a whole has overcome. And in as much as it's a very tradition-bound industry, I would use that to the advantage of the industry in terms of best practices and highlight that those traditions, safety at sea being number one, and safety at sea in every way, for every passenger, for every crew member, and really use the foundation of what has happened in the industry in terms of the quality of life that the cruise industry provides. It's a dream come true for people to go on a cruise, and people will go on cruises. People will continue to go on cruises. They like the idea and they're going to do it. And there are cruises being booked for August out of the US already. So, I think it's just getting the message. And again, it's the call to action and people understanding, all the passengers understanding that their safety is their fellow passengers' safety too. And understanding and knowing what the best practices are and having it be a community thing that's a good thing, that's a positive thing. And people can go on the cruise and have a good time while they're practicing, whatever needs to be practiced in terms of social distancing and wearing a mask and washing their hands and that kind of thing. I don't know all the answers, but I think looking back and finding examples and case studies of how the industry has overcome. I mean, when you think about it, there was a yellow fever epidemic, the 1918 epidemic, that affected global maritime around the world too. And when you set that in the context of what the industry has done in terms of supply chain and raising the level of the quality of life of of billions of people around the world because they've been able to gain access to goods that they wouldn't have had before, food they wouldn't have had before. I think there's a lot to be said for maritime, and there are a lot of great stories to tell.
Yeah, and positively, we have been seeing some initiatives now from the IMO and from CLEAR and responsible associations that are promoting the health and safety standards that have always been followed in the industry. Maybe, Natasha, you might want to elaborate a little bit more on that before we go to Sue and Athanasia on this matter.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are two separate sides of the shipping industry. You've got the cruise industry, which is tourism. I think, as Laura said, there is a good story to tell. You can talk about overcoming previous epidemics or whatever, and there's every good reason to think that will you can cruises. On one of your posts, Gina, some of your talking about how actually cruising across the Atlantic might be seen as a nicer and more pleasant way in a COVID situation and with social distancing on board a luxury liner rather than having to queue and get on an aeroplane. So it could actually be promoted as a really nice way to travel from B to B rather than inside a plane and avoid your one seat away from you. So from that point of view, tourism side and the cruise industry side, it's certainly to revive that again. I think one of the issues that we're constantly trying to push is the role of the everyday cargo merchant shipping. And one of the ironies, if you like, of this crisis is that ports continue to operate, ports open, and the ships are coming and offloading. So people are not seeing any impact on their day-to-day supply chains, apart from initially when everybody was buying up toilet paper, etc. But actually, you go to the shops now, everything's there. You can order anything on online shopping that you want. People are not seeing the impact on seafarers on the ship who are really suffering because they've had to extend contracts because they can't get off the ship, they can't be relieved because the aviation side is not working because of the restrictions on those seafarers. So that's where we have a not so nice story to tell, if you like, but we can tell the good story that actually you're getting all these goods that you need. But by the way, think of the seafarers and actually the troubles that they are having at the moment because they can't be repatriated. And that's the key message. And that, as you mentioned about, designating them as essential workers or key workers, so that they are given the rights to come off the ship and transit through a national territory in order to board a plane to get back to their home country and vice versa for new crews to join. So that's a bit more of a tricky issue perhaps to get across than the potential for the cruise industry to be reborn again, which I think, is probably not a tricky or too difficult situation to communicate, because yes, people will want to go back and they will be okay with whatever social distancing is on board. But the immediate concern is getting across the message and telling the world about the seafarers that are reaching a crucial point by the middle of June. More than 200,000 need to be either leaving the ship or coming across, because some of those seafarers, and we hear from them, have been 11, 12, 13 months on the ship, and that's quite a crazy situation for them.
Incredible. And Sue?
Yeah, I think what we're really saying is there's two sides to this. You've got the external side, which could be the cruise, the leisure, even the cargo ships getting the cargoes and the entities to the shores. And then you've got the people that actually make shipping happening, the workers, the employees, the seafarers, the port operatives, the people that are actually manning the offices, getting all this to happen. And that's the two different sides. And what we are seeing is you've got seafarers, who we've just mentioned, trapped on ships. It's terrible. And we're just now starting to get people like the BBC to take up the case. But there's also other people. You've got surveyors that have all been absolutely trapped in different countries where they went to do a survey on a ship, now can't get back home again because everything's shut down. So there are the two sides. I think the public side, the cruising, the leisure side, will pick up for the reasons we've said. I think we've got a better story to tell than maybe the airline industry. But it's going to take a while, as everybody knows, and it's going to take time to get confidence back up again. what we need to make sure is that when we do get the industry up and going again, we're 100% certain that we've got it right, because we won't get a second chance. So we need to make sure that all the hygiene issues are there, because, as I say, it's a bad news time at the moment for people, so they will absolutely jump on any story they can. So I think from that point of view, there's a great story to tell, but there's also the opportunity to really understand that what the shipping industry does for world trade. And I think that's the third element that we really need to capture on this time, which we haven't done before, which is, you know, we've got the ship, we've got all the food around the world coming in from on all these ships. And it's vital to economic trade that these ships carry on working. And I think that's something that we need to really think about as well. But my main concern at the moment is the seafarers, the surveyors, the people that are attracting countries that nobody cares about. And we've got to make sure that message really gets out there.
True. And Athanasia?
I totally agree with what was said from all the ladies, but I would like to add some points. I think that the main problem that the industry is facing is the lack of the marketing power. They do not have recognized how powerful can marketing strategies can be in order to transfer the message to the global community. And in this respect, I would like to take some other examples from other industries that they are facing the same crisis as well. But let's see the touristic industry, which is very close to the cruise segment of the shipping. They are doing campaigns, they are implementing strategies in order to gain trust again, and in order to explain to their customers that they are taking every precaution measure in order to protect them and move forward. We will have to face this and make the necessary steps to move to normality again. So why don't we, as industry, as the maritime industry, don't use marketing in order to communicate internally in the industry and externally in the global community, both what the industry offers? And I don't know if everyone is aware that 90% of the global commercial trade is moved via ships. So this is something that I have noticed that is missing, and no one knows the very important contribution that this market offers to the world. And I think that this is the point that we have to target and to contribute, all of us as professionals within this market, in order to communicate every message that could help this industry move forward.
Exactly, and I think evidently we mentioned the lack, obviously, of marketing influence and power, and how seafarers have not been acknowledged automatically, and all other issues that have been highlighted, I would say, through COVID, which it seems that we haven't been branding this industry as such very effectively. So that would lead on smoothly to my next question would be, okay, how do we brand this more effectively? What elements would create a more effective communication and marketing strategy? I know we've already touched upon points like promoting the safe and healthy, the health and safety, sorry. But anything else that you would like to add each from your own expertise? Who would like to go first? I need a volunteer this time. Yeah, okay, Farzana.
So one thing that we often do,
yes.
one thing we often do is we, anytime there's a news story running, we basically see whether or not we can pitch our client as an expert commentator to find the angle. So for instance, when there's a news story running about the lack of personal protective equipment for key workers, again, that's an opportunity for representatives of the shipping industry, the relevant ones, to pitch in and say, well, actually, this is what we're doing to enable it to happen. Because you often see a lot of proactive industries that perhaps do not make the same amount of contribution that the maritime industry does to global trade, but they really do sort of punch above their weight. And they tend to do it by sort of jumping on news stories that are already have got legs and will have a 3 to 4 cycle. And that tends to be quite effective, rather than trying to sort of just pitch very sort of industry focused angles that will tend to just run in the trade media. But what you really want to do is try and sort of elevate it to the mainstream media. And that would kind of happen by just doing an external analysis of what stories are running and how can you really segue into them in order to have that share of voice. Because actually I've learned so much from this panel. I had no idea about this level of contribution that the maritime industry has made to global trade. And I have never really given it much thought. And I have learned so much from my fellow panelists. And I feel as if there is so many stories that have to be told. But the way the human brain works is you need to kind of like put in micro stories to humanize stories. And these individual seafarers telling their story of what happened to them, so that people really do empathize with their suffering. And then on the other spectrum, really pitching in on pre-existing stories that are running, but putting in the maritime angle, so that people become a lot more aware, because people are very aware of the airline industry and other modes of transport, but they just don't have their heads around it. Obviously, you've got your two areas. You've got your, your goods, and then you've got the transport of goods, and then you've got obviously the cruise. So it's a bit of a way for us to get our heads around, but perhaps doing that newsjacking and the micro storytelling, and I'm sure it's already being done already, but it's just probably a question of efficacy, frequency, and so forth.
Excellent. Laura, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I would say that I think that in terms of internal communications, the aspect of storytelling and brand storytelling that's an opportunity to build consensus within the enterprise and highlight different jobs, functions, and encourage people to have a voice. I think social media has flattened what's available. The traditional news media surface is shrinking, right? There are a lot of journalists that are losing jobs, especially because of COVID. But I think that being able to empower individual employees as brand ambassadors can be a really powerful way to encourage. Of course, that takes training, that takes resources, and it can be kind of political. But I think that there are ways to champion an enterprise and tell the story. And certainly in terms of trade and on the dry bulk side, especially being able to talk about food and what's transported on a daily basis, and even the PPE and how much of that is some of it's coming by plane. That's the emergency product, but the product that's coming by ship too is a really good story. So the stories are there, and social media has multiple ways to tell the story, whether it's video, whether it's a podcast, whether it's photographs, or whether it's brand content. And I think that what is key in terms of digital transformation is that the consumer wants to get this message or these messages whatever way they want to. They have their mobile device, they have their tablet, they have their desktop. They want to be able to go get messaging and learn or experience in the way that they want to. So it's up to the enterprise to tell the stories across multiple platforms and create that content so that people can consume it in the way that they want. they pull it in rather than it being pushed out through the news media. We need the news media because we want to trust the news media for third-party endorsement, but also for the individual consumer who's, then you get into the demographics. A baby boomer or a silent generation person may use Facebook, but somebody who's a tween who wants to go on a cruise with their grandparents, their experience is going to be, and how they want to learn about the cruise is going to be could be very different. So it's just the knowing what's out there and picking and choosing the communications platform that are best for one's enterprise.
Sure. Thank you. Sue?
I'm going to be a little bit more controversial here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the industry wants the publicity. I think the industry is quite happy in its own little silo, working silently underneath. If I had £1 for every time in a conference somebody said to me the industry needed to raise its profile, I'll be a millionaire and wouldn't be sitting here now. We have not done it. And the industry won't do it. A number of years ago, there was 7 of the PR agencies that specialize in maritime logistics that offered to do a pro bono campaign to raise the profile of the industry, and it was turned down. If you can't get somebody to do something for free and raise its profile, it's not going to do it, as lots of privately owned companies around the world where they are actually rivals to each other, and it's not in their own interest to raise the profile because they don't want to. So I think the maritime sector is actually quite happy in its world of not being recognised and just being the machine underneath that's doing all this work. The public facing, like the cruise industry, well, that's up to the Disneys, that's up to the carnivals. They sell their holidays, and that's what they're selling, is the experience of a holiday. They don't want to sell the maritime industry. They don't need to, because it's actually a pleasure zone. It's a great experience of leisure, and that's fine. And I think I think maybe the industry needs to say, actually, we're quite happy where we are. We are going to be the unknown, quiet thing that just gets everything moving underneath, because that's where we want to sit. And maybe they'd actually feel more comfortable in their own skin if they did that.
That is unfortunately a very valid point, but my question comes into obviously belonging to the younger generation, and there's even younger people coming in that could come in. How do you sustain this industry and continue attracting talent? But anyway, that's a whole different discussion. But I
Totally with you.
Totally agree though with Sue's point. Maybe Natasha from the IMO, they should be pursuing this initiative if they want this industry to sustain what it has been doing with so many years, because for the younger generation, if you're not out there and you're not online and making an impact, not so attractive. Your thoughts on that?
Absolutely, what Farzana and Laura referred to, the great stories out there, and if they could only give, these young second officers their mobile phone and their enough Wi-Fi so that they could be broadcasting their podcasts and TikToks every day from the bridge and show what a great opportunities there are to be out at sea. I think that would be really good. But as Sue said, traditionally the merchant shipping is quite traditionalist. They're perhaps afraid that this second officer might also show I don't know, something negative. So fearful of handing over that ability to portray what's happening to the wider world. So a little bit of fear there coming from a long 100-year-old industry. So that, yeah, you're battling those two sides. We have some Instagram champions, but they are from largely the cruise sector because they are more out there, as you said. So it is a challenge, I think. And we encourage the industry to do their promotion. And Farzana had some great ideas for hijacking the news thing. And from the organization, from IMO point of view, as part of the UN, we also want to promote maritime as a means to development, particularly for developing countries, and promote that side. And that's quite a hard story to sell. But on the other hand, you can have, again, personal stories. And that's what you need. People want to read short human stories about human beings. They don't want to be told and didactic to, by the way, maritime transport's 90%, because that is not the story, but the story of, hey, how do you think the grain that made your bread got here? That is potentially a story, and the people who made that happen. So there are stories out there, but we do need to get the industry on board as well to be willing to tell those stories. It's a challenge.
True, very challenging. Athanasia, I know obviously you're a tech startup and you're a strong believer and active supporter of this in your role and generally. How can we apply this, hopefully overcoming the barrier that we're a traditional industry and not embracing this concept, but if we were to embrace it, what practices, how do we apply these practices on the wider industry?
We marketers are well aware that when you want to build a brand, you have to work in two-phase strategy. First of all, you have to build your brand internally within your organization. So your people, your employees have to be your ambassadors. So your staff, your people should communicate and should be the first represent the first that they will represent your brand in the market, and then increase awareness and build your brand externally within the market. So I believe that, of course, the maritime industry has a low awareness rate in the global society, and this is the reason that I believe there is a huge opportunity to communicate personal stories, the long history that this industry has, and why not? I think that it is very important for each consumer to know that the cereal that every day consumes are transferred via a ship. And why not? Yes, okay, we are referring at some statistics, but we can communicate to the consumer that this is not a statistic, it's an everyday human story, and this product, in order to be you're traveled from another place via a ship, and this storytelling would be very, very interesting in order to build the industry's brand and increase awareness.
Exactly. And as unfortunately we're coming towards a close, we've already run a little bit over time, but there is one point that I think we should be making, and I would like the input of all of you before we close today's panel. I think we could be discussing this issue for a few more hours as usual. So we've established obviously that the shipping industry, being traditional and being set in its own ways, does prefer to work low profile. But say if you were advising an organization at this stage, whether a cruise liner or in the maritime industry in general, on how to reestablish itself and do a reputation recovery following this crisis, and what the pros could be in comparison to the cons of putting yourself out there, which is probably the greatest fear of this industry. How would you go about pitching this, or bringing your element or advice each from your own backgrounds? Farzana, would you like to start first?
Well, I think first of all, just going on what Sue earlier said, if there is a reluctance from the industry and they have sort of legacy ways of thinking in terms of communications and marketing, the first step would be really to engage with the industry to get their buy-in. And if they do not see the value of it, then that's going to be a big stumbling block. So the first thing would be to actually PR to the industry and explain to them what are the potential sort of preferred outcomes, something granular for them to look at. So, if you speak to the cruising industry, you can say to them, well, if we were to communicate and market more effectively, then we would then, not be looking at a sort of an L-shaped recovery, but perhaps a V-shaped recovery. So, we would shorten the time it will take in order to get the customers back on board. And then if you're talking more to the B2B side of the maritime industry, it will be in terms of talent retention and so forth, and how to engage with the younger millennial and Generation Z coming in. So it will be trying to find out what are the pain points in the industry, and then trying to see how PR and marketing can actually address those pain points, and then speak to them in their language. And and some obviously people, they do not feel comfortable with intangible services like public relations and marketing, and what they really need is sort of some hard metrics in terms of outcomes to sort of make them understand where the direction is. And I think there is also a potential generational divide, and also if there's family, I've worked with family-owned businesses and listed corporates, and there's very different cultures in play in terms of risk appetite and the allocation of budget for intangible services like marketing and PR. So I would really focus first of all on how to sell it to the industry and the organization, and once you get their buy-in, then there needs to be a budget allocation for crafting compelling stories, and then understanding the most effective channels to reach this specific target audience, and then how to measure and evaluate it, and then feed that back into the planning process, so that it becomes very much strategic rather than just off the hoof tactical with coming out of a crisis, what the hell should we do? So it becomes much more considered and part of the DNA of the industry, as opposed to a bit of a band-aid on the industry during this time as we are coming out of lockdown.
Excellent, very true. Actually, I think Sue, might be able to give us some thoughts on that and her experience in trying to pitch it to the industry.
Well, I think it's twofold. I think as the industry, from the cruise side of things, it's going to be about safety and trust. It's about what Laura said earlier about really making sure you get those messages over, that it's a safe industry and a safe environment to go back to. I think as we come out of this, people are a lot more worried and concerned for their own health. So there's a really good message there. And I think, as I say, I think the cruise lines will do that themselves. And I think that we perhaps need to support it as much as we can, but leave them to do what they need to do themselves in marketing. On the other side, looking at the B2B side, the commercial side, how the cargo gets around, and also how we attract the right talent into the industry. I think what we need is role models and ambassadors. We need people that will actually act and be the public face for the shipping industry. All the other industries, if you think about them, they have one or two people that are the face of the industry. We don't. In shipping, there is nobody that's really the face of the industry. We have some very good people. I mean, I always go back to the fact that Maersk launched a whole cargo shipping service on Facebook. That was the only place they did any of their PR, marketing, and their messaging. It just shows that if you just think outside the box, there's lots of things to be done. I think it's about having more of a confidence. I think the shipping industry lacks confidence in itself. I think we need to actually be proud of what we do and be actually want to advocate it out to the world, rather than being this quiet little thing that sits underneath that nobody troubles and nobody gets worried about and leaves us alone. So I think it's about role models. It's about getting our message across in a succinct way of what we do. One of the things I always say is that the shipping industry is the barometer of the world. If shipping's doing well, then the world economy is doing well. If shipping's doing badly, the world economy is doing badly. And I think it's those sorts of messages we need to get out there. We need to be more proud in what we do, because it's a fantastic industry, and it's a really, really crying shame we're not more proud of what we do.
Sure, indeed we should. Natasha, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I think you've given great examples there of how the shipping industry can promote itself. Has got good stories to tell. From our side, I'd say we have a key day coming up, which is the International Day of the Seafarer on 25th of June, and that's an ideal sort of target date, if you like, for companies, for all companies involved in the maritime industry, to thank seafarers, to promote their brand by thanking seafarers for the work they've done, particularly during this crisis and what some of them have had to endure because of having to extend their contracts. So I'm taking this opportunity to promote this United Nations International Day of the Seafarer. It's in its 10th iteration this year. So we really want to try and get as many people on board as possible, saying, you know, what are you as a shipping company doing to celebrate your seafarers or the people involved, you know, the maritime personnel, and using that as a hook in order to do something special on that day, to recognize the challenges and also to look ahead to the opportunities for the future as well.
Let's hope to be seeing more initiatives in this respect. Athanasia?
Actually, I totally agree with what Farzana said earlier. For me, the most important issue here is that if the industry wants to change, and if the maritime industry wants to differentiate itself from what was happening 100 years ago, we are living in a world that is constantly changing. Technology is in every aspect of our lives. Everything has changed. Nothing has remained the same as our grandparents used to do their everyday lives. So from my perspective, I think that first of all, the industry and the main stakeholders of the industry have to realize the value that would take if there is any value for them to communicate the industry outside itself, because I have from my experience understand that we are happy with what we do. We are doing our job excellent, and this is fine. Okay, this might be fine, but if you have a different target, if you want to communicate what you're doing and what is your contribution to the community, or if you have another target to attract new talent, or whatever that goal that might be, you have to set a strategy plan, a marketing strategy plan, and then implement it in order to achieve these goals.
Exactly, especially if we're going to remain relevant and sustainable. And Laura, can we also have your thoughts on how we should be pitching this to the industry to convince them that and persuade them of the importance?
I would say that my number one focus would be the framework of digital transformation. Everything is being impacted by digital transformation. There's a famous story about when the railroads were first, the Transcontinental Railroad was laid in the United States. And the story goes that all the townspeople along the railway could hear the workers building the railway, and they could hear the train, but they didn't know what it looked like, and they didn't know what it would do. And I would say that train is being built in the maritime industry. And digital transformation, the digital disruptors that, you know, the automated ships and the drones, and how that's going to transform the industry, and things that we don't even know yet, but also the notion of cybersecurity, information security, and data privacy are very essential. So I love the maritime industry because it's so tradition bound, and safety at sea and all the wonderful things about the traditions of the maritime industry. But it is being disrupted by digital transformation. And what that will look like in 5 years, 10 years, and 20 years from now, leaders need to be thinking about that today and planning for that and mapping what that is going to look like and how they can position themselves for competitive advantage in the industry.
Exactly, and I think it's about time that the maritime industry steps up its game when it comes to PR and communications, because it is being disrupted, and going forward it's essential. So unfortunately we've run a little over time, so we should be wrapping up now. Is there anything else that you would like to add before we wrap up today's show?
Thank you, Gina. Applause
Thank
for
you,
Gina.
Thank you, Gina. Been really good. Excellent.
I can see how the
Yes.
health workers feel now. Every Thursday with the clapping. Thank you very much, ladies, for being with us today at It's All About Shipping. It was a pleasure hosting you, and I really do think that we had a very fruitful discussion. Maybe we should be taking it a step further and taking our next panel live to the IMO to make sure it goes forward and see what we can do about stepping up that game. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you also to the audience for tuning in again. Once again, it was It's All About Shipping with Gina Panayiotou, the virtual series. And on Friday, we have another very interesting panel with 7 lawyers from around the world. We're hosting a global legal roundtable to discuss the legal impacts from various jurisdictions throughout COVID. So that was it. Have a nice evening or afternoon, depending on which part of the world you're in. And see you on Friday. Thank you, ladies. Bye.
Thank you,
Thank
Gina.
you.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.